All right, let's take a closer look at Carrefour's reinvention. We're joined now by Planet Retail analyst Natalie Berg. Natalie, firstly, is Carrefour on the right track is one thing, but first of all, I want to ask you, is this concept of a hypermarket something which is now, well, gone in Western Europe?
Well, yes, it's certainly a dated concept, and I think if we look outside of just Carrefour and the other hypermarkets, it's no surprise the hypermarket growth has, been stagnant in Europe for a number of years, particularly in France, where the concept is actually originated by Carrefour. So I think it's important to, if you look at Carrefour's Western European markets, which account for around 80% of their sales, they're struggling with productivity levels from their existing stores, and at the same time, we're at saturation levels in France, so they can't open new stores. So it's a real struggle, and I think there's two things that they really need to address in their French hypermarkets, and that's really around price perception. They're facing a lot of competition from the hard discounters, from Aldi and Lidl, and that's really eating into their market share and putting a lot of pressure on pricing. Well,
okay, if the hypermarket model doesn't work in Western Europe, it does seem to work in the emerging markets. Why, are they getting it right there, or is it just that they're getting it wrong in Western Europe?
Well, it's just about saturation. I think there's more fertile grounds for growth in emerging markets. So they're seeing really good growth coming from China, coming from Latin America, especially in Brazil, and also Turkey. So there's lots of places where they can expand the hypermarket concept. But I think, Lars Olofsson is right to say that it really needs to be reinvented in Europe. They're going to have to totally revitalize their non-food offering, which accounts for around 40% of hypermarket sales. There's a lot of work to be done.
Okay, you talked about price. What about other parts which have to be reinvented? What do you recommend here?
Well, again, non-food is the #1 thing that I think James McCann, being an ex-TESCO executive, will really bring a lot to the table.
He's head of the French division now, isn't he?
He's head of the French hypermarkets, yeah, that's right. But he came from TESCO Hungary. He's got a lot of experience in sort of running a tight ship in terms of keeping costs down, which is a really important thing as well that Carrefour is going to look to do. So that, they've got their work cut out for them. I think cost control is really going to be the #1 thing, and then really reinventing the hypermarket, creating a compelling in-store experience.
You mentioned non-food, Natalie. What does Carrefour have to address when it comes to non-food?
Well, I think what's interesting is the Carrefour concept, hypermarket concept, was created 50 years ago and hasn't really changed that much, over the past 50 years.
But, I mean, it seems to work for Tesco. Why won't it work for Carrefour?
Well, the UK hypermarkets, the Tesco's and Sainsbury's of the world, really only made a play for non-food in the past several years. So they've taken a much more strategic approach, and they haven't gone for everything under one roof. They've been a lot more strategic about which categories to include. And I think, Carrefour's on the right track. One of the most recent stores they opened in Paris, they actually removed certain categories that weren't really performing well. So things like automotive and DIY.
You mean you could go into Carrefour and buy a car?
You can't. Well, maybe not car. Car parts.
No, you're talking about a customer-centric approach needed here. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's really about putting shoppers at the core of your strategies. And I think, Carrefour especially has the ability to tap into 11 million loyalty card users' data to really analyze shopper insights and get a better understanding of what consumers are buying, and then increasing the relevance of their offering in the store. So I think that's something that they'll look to do, going forward, and make their stores a lot more tailored to the local shoppers.
Okay, James McCann, we discussed him. He was poached from Tesco in Hungary by Carrefour. What will he do in France? Is it this sort of EDLP, everyday low pricing, those sort of concepts coming through? Yeah,
we'll see. I think we'll see a lot more work around pricing. They've done a lot of work already on their private labels, so they've launched Carrefour Discount, which has really helped to prevent some shoppers from defecting to the hard discounters like Aldi or Lidl, because they've improved their price perception. So pricing is clearly going to be a #1, and cost control, as I said, in France, but also outside. We're going to see a lot more divestments, I think. We saw it in Belgium, we saw it in Italy. I think they're really going to look throughout their store portfolio, streamline their operations, and just focus on their most profitable stores.
Okay, very quickly as well, what is about the state of retail in Europe generally?
That's a good question. I think, again, hypermarkets, we're going to continue to see very slow growth, but it's really the discounters are the ones to watch. The Aldis and the Lidls of the world are really gaining market share. It has slowed a little bit since the onset of the recession, because the big hypermarkets are becoming a lot more price competitive, but really in the long term, they're the ones to watch.
Natalie, thank you so much for joining us. Natalie Berg, she's from Planet Retail.